Hi guys, welcome back. We're inside the airplane right now. We're on a heading of 170 to the PJM VOR. We're only about a mile away from the VOR and we'll overflight in a few seconds. The first thing we're going to do after overflying the VOR is we're going to turn to a heading of 158 for 2 minutes for our teardrop procedure entry. The second thing we're going to do is we're going to start a timer and time our flight on a heading of 158 for 2 minutes. Okay, there goes the VOR needle. It just flipped, turned to a heading of 158, and let's start a timer for 2 minutes. At this point, the only thing we care about is establishing ourselves on that heading of 158. The only thing that's going to tell us that we're on a heading of 158 is our heading indicator. So at this point, we're only flying to a heading. We don't have to establish ourselves on a radial of 158 from the PJM VOR. We just have to fly this heading of 158. Next thing we're going to do is we're going to put a heading of 308 in our VOR heading. Let's immediately put a heading of 096 in standby. We're going to use a heading of 096 after we overfly the VOR and we come back to the runway. So we're going to just put that in standby and leave it alone for now. Okay, so now on the VOR, we have put in a heading of 308. After we do this procedure turn, we're going to establish ourselves on a heading of 308 to the VOR, as per the approach plate. Okay, so the next thing that's going to happen is at 2 minutes, we're going to start a half standard rate turn to the left to intercept that heading of 308. One quick note, what is a half standard rate turn in an airliner? There are two ways you can do this. You can either use your flight director if you know how to use it and establish yourselves on a half standard rate turn in an airliner, or we're just going to approximate it. If our approach speed is 140 to about 160 knots, we can use from 15 to 20 degrees of bank. If our airspeed is from 160 to about 190 knots, we can use 20 to 25 degrees of bank. If our approach speed is 190 to 200 knots, we can use 25 to 30 degrees of bank, and this should work out pretty well. Okay, the timer is at 2 minutes. Let's start a 20 degree bank turn to the left to intercept that heading of 308. Now as we're starting this turn, obviously we're still at 3,500 feet. Remember, after overflying the VOR, we were at 3,500, and we're going to start this turn at 3,500 feet. So far we have stayed level. So when are we going to start our descent to 2,600 feet? We're going to start our descent to 2,600 feet once we're established on a heading of 308 to the PJM VOR. When are we established on a heading on a VOR? How do we know? In this Airbus, we're established on a heading to a VOR once the VOR needle is in between these two little circles. So as we see, the needle is starting to come in. Okay, the needle right now is inside these two circles. So this means we're established on a heading of 308 to the PJM VOR in this case. So we're immediately going to start our descent to 2,600 feet. And as you can see, we overshot it a little bit, but this is okay. The reason we overshot it is because the winds have pushed us a little bit, and that is fine. The procedure turns are not meant to be exact. The procedure turns are only meant to put us in a position to intercept headings back to the VOR. In this case, the heading is 308. And as you can see, as we have rolled out of the turn, the needle is still in between those two circles. So we're still established on a heading of 308 to the VOR, so we did pretty good. We can fly back and intercept the needle, that is fine, but as long as the needle is in between those two circles, we're considered to be established on a heading to the VOR. In this case, like I said, a heading of 308. Okay, so the next thing that's going to happen for this approach is we're going to descend down to 2,600 feet. We're going to maintain 2,600 feet until we overfly the VOR. Now, what is going to happen after we overfly this VOR on a heading of 308? After we overfly the VOR for the second time on a heading of 308, this is going to be the second part of our approach. The second part of this approach is going to establish us onto the final approach. So as we overfly the VOR, we're not going to change our heading. Our heading will still be a heading of 308, except now it will be a radial from the VOR, the radial of 308 from the VOR. The second thing that's going to happen is we're going to start a timer. Remember, in this case, the approach plate told us to fly a radial of 308 from the PJM VOR for 1 minute 45 seconds. So as we overfly the VOR, we're going to start a timer, and we're going to time ourselves for 1 minute and 45 seconds. The third thing that's going to happen is as we overfly the VOR, we're going to start a descent to 1,500 feet. Okay, there goes the needle. We just overflew the VOR, the needle flipped. Let's start a timer, and let's start a descent to 1,500 feet. Okay, here comes the radial of 308 from the PJM VOR. Right now, we're established on a radial of 308 from the PJM VOR, and we're going to fly this radial of 308 from the PJM VOR for 1 minute and 45 seconds. Okay, so what's going to happen next? The next thing that's going to happen is we're going to level off at 1,500 feet. We're going to maintain 1,500 feet until we're established on a heading of 096 back to the VOR. This is our final approach. Also, at 1 minute and 45 seconds, we're going to start a left turn of 20 degrees, a half standard rate turn, to intercept a heading of 096 back to the VOR. The heading of 096 back to the VOR is going to be our final approach. Once we are established on a heading of 096 back to the VOR, that point is going to be our final approach fix. We're going to lower our landing gear, and we're going to do a pre-landing checklist. Okay, we're at 1,500 feet right now. We're going to maintain this 1,500 feet until we've established ourselves on a heading of 096 back to the VOR. Okay, here's 1 minute 45 seconds. Let's start a 20-degree bank turn to the left to intercept a heading of 096 back to the VOR. This is going to be, of course, our final approach. As we're turning to a heading of 096 back to the VOR, let's put in 096 on our VOR heading. See, we had that 096 heading ready. All we had to do was push a button. Now we have the heading of 096 to the VOR on our VOR gauge. Once we're established on a heading of 096 to the VOR, we're going to put our landing gear down, and we're going to start a descent down to 1,040 feet. We're going to maintain 1,040 feet until we pick up the runway visually. If we don't pick up the runway visually, we're going to do a missed approach at the VOR. But the weather is not too bad. We should be able to see the runway from far away. A very important part in flying is picking up the runway visually. I have said this many times, and the guys that have been flying the simulator for a while believe me, and some of the new guys don't. But I'm going to tell you this again. It is a lot easier to line yourself up with the runway visually. So once we have visual contact with the runway, we're going to maintain that alignment with the runway visually. Okay, the needle is starting to come in. And at this point, we are established on a heading of 096 back to the VOR. So, once we're established on a heading of 096, let's start a descent down to 1040 feet, and let's put our landing gear down. Okay, there is the runway. Okay, I went a little bit under 1,000 feet. As long as it's less than 200 feet in a Microsoft Flight Simulator, I'm okay. Okay, there's the runway. Let's put full flaps in. Slow down to our final approach speed of 150 knots, and we are looking good. At this point, let's climb back up to 1,040 feet. Okay, we are at 1,040 feet. At this point, we're going to maintain 1,040 feet until we intercept our glide slope using the Princess Juliana runway PAPI lights. Once we intercept a glide slope, we're going to start a descent down onto the runway. We're starting to intercept the glide slope. For 150 knot ground approach speed, which is about what we have, we can put an airplane at about 750 foot per minute rate of descent, and that should keep us on the glide slope. We can make minor adjustments from there, but 700 to 750 feet per minute rate of descent should be pretty good for this approach. Of course, we're lined up with the runway, and we'll keep our alignment visually. Okay, at this point we're pretty close to the runway. Let's keep a sterile cockpit, meaning no talking unless it's necessary until after we land. Okay, and there we are. We're on the center line. Pretty nice landing, pretty decent landing. We did pretty good. Let's take a look at our flight path and see how we did.